now have to concern themselves with going back to work or staying at work. And so the disappointment of that middle-class group, that alienation, assured Obama of his election, to my way of thinking.
How do you see it?
I think that part of what people are getting, or what people have learned in this country, is that part and parcel to your happiness is your ability to accumulate things, is your ability to have stuff. And I think that people are, when they begin to see that their ability to do that, now there's two things going on from the cultural vantage point. And being a student of Dr. Nichols, I created a model. Actually, it's a curriculum, and around this whole idea of what does our cultural belief, our value systems have to do with our ability to function, whether it's in an educational environment or whether it's a professional environment. And what I wanted to take a look at is what is the relationship of that cultural piece with this other piece, this whole idea of this material well-being. And when you are not, and this is what a lot of research has shown, and particularly the work of James Gilligan, that when you do not feel that stability, that sense of self, the sense of culture, the sense of identity, that it is extraordinarily threatening to the human being, more threatening than anything even physical, is that whole idea that a loss of self, a loss of culture, a loss of community. Now you couple that with the inability, again, the inability to access those material things that the society is continually telling you measures your worth. You have now you've just created a whole nother level of problem for these people here, and they're either going to do one of two things. They're going to implode on themselves or explode out there, and we're seeing that.
Joy DeGruy say this when she's really gotten my attention by talking about post-traumatic slave syndrome. In other words, this kind of humiliation and cruelty was there from the jump.
Absolutely.
How do you work that out? Even if things are a little better today, how do you get all of that pus out of your system that was put there when you were brought here as a slave?
Well, here's the thing that's so miraculous about black people throughout the diaspora, that we have had the ability, despite those things, to arise, to grow. But what I'm saying that we have to look at here is that you have people, for example, when I look at my parents, and we've talked about that, your dad, and the kinds of struggles that they had. What they did have, even despite extreme discrimination, I mean talking about lynchings, how bad it was, yet there was a sense of, let's look at what was intact. There was a sense of community, a sense of family, a sense of collective identity, a sense of culture, if you will. And when we begin to see that deteriorate alongside, because you still have the oppression, you still have the institutionalized racism, you still have those things intact. Even Obama himself talked about it. Even our, the U.S. House of Representatives apologized for it. So we are clear that that's there. But without those factors that help us to be resilient, without those strengths that allow us to move forward, in the face of even insurmountable obstacles financially, materially, when you add those together, that's when you see the combustion that begins to destroy the person. So post-traumatic slave syndrome is alive and well. It is here. It is something that we have all dealt with. But now we have less supports to help us facilitate some growth and change around that. And it's, again, it becomes even worse when there's a lack of goods that are available to people. So I'm saying that we are creating we're putting gasoline on it when you start adding the economics to it.
Okay. That's an interesting word, economics. Demands that we take a break. You know what I'm saying? Dr. Nichols, before you were so rudely interrupted.
Well, when we talk about a culture being destroyed, we have to look at systemic occurrences.
I.e.?
I'm old enough to have been a part of a welfare system that had two levels, welfare and aid to dependent children. Now it's become aid to families of dependent children. In order to get that aid to dependent children, which was a check that came every month with certain benefits and housing. What happened was, in my city, Detroit, Michigan, men had to leave the home. So what you're doing is you're destroying the fabric of the family in order for a woman and children to have economic security.
Mhm.
In Detroit, because it was the automotive city, there were months when everybody worked almost 24 hours a day to get the new cars out, and then there were slack periods when no one worked. So generally around Christmas is when you got your layoff notice for a couple of months. Well, if you have not saved, or you've not budgeted properly, or you've spent all your money on rent, then you don't have enough to tide you over and to take care of your family during those periods in which you're laid off. If, however, you abandon your family, which simply means you go across the street to the rooming house and take a room there, then the city of Detroit, through ADC, will give your wife a check each month, provide housing in the projects, and other care. Now, what that systemic reality is, that you have destroyed the father figure in that family in order for him to assure 12 months out of the year his children will have a proper place to stay. Now, how do you further diminish his role? If, when he is working, he buys new shoes for his children and takes them there, then I, as a social worker or caseworker going in, if I see the new shoes, I will take the cost of them away from the monthly check. Okay? Another thing, if I go, you get paid extra as a social worker at that time. If I go on Friday night at 10, 11 o'clock and find the man in the home, then the woman loses her benefits. So not only are you breaking up the family, you're not permitting the man to really contribute, you're developing criminal behavior. So the children in the neighborhood very quickly know who the social workers are, and as they're approaching, the word gets around. All the little things that you have that are not on the welfare list are put in a closet and closed the door. But what is more distressing to me is that at Howard University at one time, we had support groups for grandmothers 30 and younger. So you see the kinds of behaviors that you're creating systemically that perpetuate a slave syndrome.
Well, your colleague has spent a lot of time and energy talking about this psychic injury that was done to us in being snatched from home, Africa, and abused. And maybe not enough attention has been given to the abused and the abuser. But we all carry it. That's what you said. How do we reconcile that? Even if there's a little give today, I've been led to understand by you, Joy, that we still carry that damage in our system. Am I right or wrong?
Absolutely. In our behavior, in our beliefs.
So how do we get that rinsed out of us? Or is it possible?
Well, you know, I don't know that you can entirely eradicate the level of trauma, injury to any group, but I think that you have to first take a look at it and look and begin to question and look at your behaviors, just like anything else that we look at. There are things, for example, growing up that my mother cooked that I don't cook. That I just, you know, some of those things, recipes are really good. Some of the things that my mother used and she cooked with aren't all that healthy, so I'm not going to continue that behavior. In the same way, we don't question our relationships, our behaviors, our attitudes about each other, our beliefs about what we can achieve. All of those things are colored by our environment, which is then impacted by our history. So what I'm saying we have to do is begin to look at, don't take for granted, in other words, and swallow whole. We can't. We have to look at those things and go, now what of these behaviors, these attitudes, do I want to pass along to my daughter? What am I going to stop and look at and go, you know, I don't know whether or not this is something that's useful and helpful. The study guide, for example, that I just completed, really speaks to how one looks at oneself. I mean, we're in a clinical realm, so we overlook at ourselves. The average person does not question those things. It becomes what you call family, or mom did it, was good enough for mom. So there are things that we have to, I believe, to get at that contemporary piece, is we have to begin to question our contemporary behavior and attitude.